11-year-old Jaycee Lee Dugard was kidnapped in front of her classmates and stepfather. Despite this, they couldn't find her for more than 15 years. A real lead only appeared when the kidnapper himself made his presence known. We're telling the story of a girl who spent almost 2 decades in captivity. A too-quick abduction. In 1990, 11-year-old Jaycee Lee Dugard, along with her mother, stepfather, and younger sister, moved from Garden Grove to South Lake Tahoe, California, USA. It was a quiet, peaceful suburb, considered ideal at the time for a young family. However, less than a year later, a horrifying crime occurred right there. On June 10, 1991, Jaycee Lee Dugard was walking from her home to the bus stop where she was supposed to catch the school bus. As usual, Jaycee was walking along the road, lost in thought, while her stepfather watched her from a distance. After some time, a gray sedan approached the girl. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. He opened the window and pretended he was going to ask Jaycee for directions. Within seconds, the stranger reached out of the car and paralyzed Dugard with a stun gun. Immediately after, a woman got out of the car and shoved the child into the passenger seat. The gray sedan disappeared around the corner, and no one managed to remember its license plate number. The case quickly gained publicity. Within a few hours, national media outlets began writing about the incident. The girl's abduction was even featured in several episodes of the popular TV show America's Most Wanted. The girl's mother, Terry Probin, created a search group called Jaycee's Hope and announced a reward for information about the child's whereabouts. Dozens of volunteers participated in the search for Jaycee, and flyers with the girl's photos were posted all over the city. Soon, pink ribbons began appearing on the streets. People hung them to draw attention to the tragedy. Jaycee's biological father and stepfather were among the first suspects, but both were able to prove their innocence by passing lie detector tests. The search for Jaycee continued for the next several years. However, the police tended to view the case as a cold case. They preferred to treat new evidence about the abducted girl with skepticism. For instance, in April 1992, a man reported seeing a girl who looked very much like Dugard in a yellow van at a gas station almost 300 kilometers from her home, but he couldn't specify the vehicle's license plate number. The police went to check the specified location but didn't even bother to inspect the parking lot. The information couldn't be confirmed, although later it turned out that it really was Jaycee. In 2002, rescue workers received a report. A teenage girl had dislocated her shoulder in the swimming pool of a 51-year-old man named Phillip Garrido. Although the man had previously been convicted of rape and was prohibited from interacting with minors, the information wasn't passed on to the police. In 2006, a neighbor of the same Phillip Garrido called emergency services, reporting that there were tents in the backyard of his house where children were living. The neighbor described the property owner as a sexually obsessed psychopath. At that time, a local police officer came to Garrido's house and talked with him for about half an hour, but never attempted to enter the house or inspect the backyard. Garrido got off with a warning. On August 24, 2009, Phillip Garrido again came to the attention of the police. He himself went to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in San Francisco to literally hand over his essay on methods for rehabilitating people who had committed sexual violence. According to Phillip, this could be done with the help of a certain device that allowed reading and implanting thoughts. This is how Garrido wanted to transmit correct instructions to rapists. On the same day, Garrido, along with 2 teenage girls aged 12 and 15, visited the police department at the University of California, Berkeley. There, he tried to obtain permission to hold a special Christian event at the university. The department staff told the man to come back tomorrow, but they noticed his erratic behavior and the submissively gloomy faces of the children, so they decided to look into Phillip's background. In the database, they found information that Garrido had previously been sentenced to 50 years for rape. He was released on parole after 11 years of imprisonment, and that he was not allowed to be near minors. It also turned out that a psychiatric examination ordered by the court had diagnosed Phillip Garrido as a sexual deviant and chronic drug addict. The next day, Garrido came to the police department again with the girls, demanding permission to hold a meeting of participants in his God's Desire program. The staff didn't listen to the man and informed him that he had twice violated the rules of his parole. The police also planned to inspect Garrido's residence. At that moment, Phillip's official wife Nancy and his elderly mother, who suffered from dementia, were in the house. They provided their documents and answered all the questions asked. The police didn't notice anything suspicious. When asked about the girls who were seen with him at the department, he replied that they were the daughters of his relative. The police were satisfied with the answer and left, saying that Phillip and his family should appear at the parole office the very next day to explain all the violations to his supervisor. As a law-abiding citizen, on August 26th, Phillip came to the supervisory body along with his wife Nancy Garrido, 2 teenage girls, and Jaycee Lee Dugard, who introduced herself as Alyssa. They decided to interrogate the women separately from Phillip. The man was taken to another room. Alyssa said that she was the mother of 2 girls and that, although she knew about Phillip's past, she considered him a great man who had changed since he was convicted. The girl looked too young, and the officer inquired about her age. Alyssa said she was 29 years old, and laughing, noted that she often hears such compliments about her age. "I'm often mistaken for my daughter's sister." Garrido, while in another room, stated that all 3 girls were his nieces. The testimonies didn't match. When Alyssa was asked to show her documents, she began to get nervous, defensive, asking on what grounds she was being interrogated. She quickly cracked and told a new story about how she had run away from an abusive husband, and Garrido had simply given her shelter. In the adjacent room, Phillip Garrido had already confessed to kidnapping and raping Jaycee Lee Dugard. Phillip also revealed that the 2 teenage girls were indeed his children with Jaycee, meaning the girl was partly telling the truth. Garrido and his wife were arrested, and a special FBI agent called Terry Probin, Jaycee's mother, who had never lost hope of finding her daughter all these years. Thus, in 2009, the tragic story that had begun 18 years earlier came to an end. Life with the Garrido family. As soon as 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard arrived at the kidnapper's house, Phillip Garrido raped her. For all the following years, she was regularly subjected to sexual violence. For a long time, the man chained the girl with handcuffs to furniture and kept her in a separate, half-empty room where he brought food. However, this didn't continue the entire time. By 2009, Jaycee was already living in the backyard of the Garrido house, where there were tents and outbuildings surrounded by a high fence. Backyard of the Garrido house. Garrido told the girl that he had sexual problems, and that he was raping her so as not to do it to other girls. This is how he convinced Jaycee that she was saving potential victims at the cost of her own freedom. Later in her memoirs, Dugard recounted that after almost every act of violence, Phillip would ask for her forgiveness. In 1994, 14-year-old Jaycee gave birth to her first daughter by Phillip. In 1997, she had her second. When the children began to grow up, Garrido invented a legend according to which Jaycee was their older sister. He gave the girls to his wife Nancy to raise, the same woman who had helped the maniac kidnap Dugard. By the way, Garrido met his wife in prison while serving that very first sentence for raping a woman. Nancy was visiting her incarcerated uncle there and accidentally started talking to Phillip. The couple got married in prison in 1981 and moved in together in 1988, after Garrido's release. According to Jaycee's recollections, Garrido's wife Nancy first came to her room only 7 months after the kidnapping with a stuffed toy, chocolate milk, and tearful apologies. Nancy alternated between motherly care, coldness, and cruelty, and successfully played the role of overseer when Phillip returned to prison for a few months after failing a drug test. Later in interviews, Jaycee admitted that her daughters became her salvation. She coped with confinement by planting flowers in the garden, playing with her daughters, and teaching them. She herself didn't go to school after the kidnapping, and her captors didn't take care of her education. The only sources of knowledge for the young mother and her children were Garrido's few books and a TV with educational channels. Most of all, according to Jaycee, she wanted to see her mother and was very afraid of forgetting what her face looked like and how her voice sounded. Nevertheless, when Jaycee grew older, Garrido brought her to work in his printing shop. Jaycee communicated with clients, had access to a work phone and email, but never tried to tell anyone about her kidnapping. Why did she remain silent? After the arrest of Phillip and Nancy Garrido, Jaycee retained custody of her children and also took the pets she had cared for from the Garrido house. The girl reunited with her parents, but just a few days later, her stepfather shared with the press his assumption that Jaycee was suffering from Stockholm Syndrome and felt an emotional attachment to her kidnapper. Jaycee herself has always denied her attachment to Phillip. A few years after her release, she wrote a book called A Stolen Life, in which she explained her submissiveness as resignation and learned helplessness. The girl described how difficult it was for her to endure constant sexual torture and how she adapted to the kidnapper's rules in order to survive. On April 28, 2011, the Garrido couple pleaded guilty to kidnapping and rape. Phillip was sentenced to 431 years to life in prison, while Nancy received 36 years to life with the possibility of parole in August 2029. Jaycee Lee Dugard did not attend the sentencing. Her mother read her statement in the courtroom. Since Phillip Garrido was on probation at the time of the kidnapping, Jaycee filed a lawsuit against the state of California, which was supposed to be supervising him. The state admitted fault and paid the girl compensation in the amount of $20 million. Later, Jaycee also filed a claim against the federal government, but the U.S. Court of Appeals rejected her demands. In 2016, Jaycee published a second book, Freedom, My Book of Firsts, in which she recounted how her years after liberation went and what difficulties she faced in the free world. The harrowing tale of Jaycee Lee Dugard, 18 Years of Captivity and the Journey to Freedom. On a sunny morning in June 1991, the quiet suburb of South Lake Tahoe, California, became the setting for a crime that would shock the nation and remain unsolved for nearly 2 decades. 11-year-old Jaycee Lee Dugard, a bright-eyed girl with a sweet smile and a zest for life, was walking to her school bus stop when the unthinkable happened. In broad daylight, with her stepfather watching from a distance, Jaycee was abducted by strangers in a gray sedan. This moment marked the beginning of an 18-year ordeal that would test the limits of human endurance and resilience. The abduction, June 10, 1991, started like any other day for the Dugard family. Jaycee, excited about the approaching end of the school year, set off for her bus stop wearing her favorite pink outfit. Her stepfather, Carl Probin, watched from the garage as Jaycee made her way up the street. Suddenly, a gray sedan pulled up beside her. In a flash, a man leaned out of the car window, stunning Jaycee with a taser. A woman emerged from the vehicle, quickly bundling the paralyzed child into the car. As Carl frantically pedaled his bicycle in pursuit, the sedan disappeared around a corner, taking Jaycee with it. The community of South Lake Tahoe was thrown into turmoil. How could a child be snatched so easily in broad daylight? The search for Jaycee began immediately, with local law enforcement, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers combing the area. Flyers with Jaycee's photo were plastered across the region, and her story was featured on national television programs like America's Most Wanted. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, hope began to dwindle. But for Terry Probin, Jaycee's mother, giving up was never an option. She established the Jaycee's Hope Foundation, dedicated to keeping her daughter's case in the public eye and supporting other families of missing children. The captors, Phillip and Nancy Garrido. While the search for Jaycee continued fruitlessly, she was being held captive just 170 miles away in Antioch, California, by Phillip and Nancy Garrido. Phillip Garrido, the mastermind behind the abduction, was no stranger to the criminal justice system. Born in 1951 in Pittsburgh, California, Garrido had a troubled childhood marked by drug abuse and sexual obsessions. In 1976, Garrido was arrested for kidnapping and raping a 25-year-old woman in South Lake Tahoe. He was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison for this crime, but due to the legal system's intricacies, he was paroled after serving only 11 years. It was during his time in prison that he met Nancy Bocanegra, who was visiting an incarcerated relative. Despite his convict status, Nancy fell in love with Phillip, and they married in 1981 while he was still behind bars. After his release in 1988, Phillip and Nancy settled in Antioch, California. Outwardly, they appeared to be a normal couple. Phillip even started a small printing business, presenting himself as a reformed man who had found religion. However, beneath this facade of normalcy, Phillip's deviant desires continued to fester. Nancy Garrido, despite being aware of her husband's criminal past, became an active accomplice in Jaycee's abduction and subsequent captivity. Her role in this horrific crime raises complex questions about the nature of complicity and the psychological dynamics of abusive relationships. Life in captivity. For Jaycee, life as she knew it ended the moment she was forced into that gray sedan. Upon arriving at the Garrido property, she was immediately subjected to sexual assault by Phillip Garrido. This brutal introduction to her new reality was just the beginning of years of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Initially, Jaycee was kept chained up in a soundproofed room in the backyard, hidden from view by tall fences and dense foliage. The room, little more than a shed, became her prison for the first years of her captivity. Phillip would bring her food and water, but these visits invariably led to further abuse. As time passed, Jaycee's world expanded slightly. She was allowed to move into a larger tent in the backyard compound. Phillip began to involve her in his printing business, allowing her limited contact with the outside world through email and phone interactions with customers. However, this taste of normalcy was always overshadowed by the reality of her situation. Perhaps the most psychologically complex aspect of Jaycee's captivity was Phillip Garrido's twisted attempts to justify his actions. He told Jaycee that she was saving other girls from abuse by submitting to him. He spoke of hearing the voice of God and claimed that his actions were part of a greater spiritual plan. These manipulations, combined with the constant threat of violence, created a state of learned helplessness in Jaycee. Motherhood in captivity. In 1994, at the age of 14, Jaycee gave birth to her first daughter. The delivery took place in the backyard compound, with only Nancy Garrido to assist. 3 years later, in 1997, Jaycee gave birth to her second daughter. These children, products of repeated rape, became Jaycee's reason for survival. Raising children in captivity presented unimaginable challenges. Jaycee had no formal education beyond the 5th grade, no access to medical care, and extremely limited resources. Yet, she devoted herself to her daughters, determined to give them as normal a life as possible under the circumstances. Phillip Garrido created an elaborate lie to explain the presence of the children, telling them that Jaycee was their older sister and that Nancy was their mother. The girls were homeschooled and had limited contact with the outside world, but were allowed more freedom of movement than Jaycee. Despite the horrific circumstances of their conception and birth, Jaycee's love for her daughters became her lifeline. In her later writings, she would describe how the joy of motherhood gave her the strength to endure her ongoing ordeal. Missed opportunities. Throughout Jaycee's 18 years in captivity, there were several instances where her discovery seemed tantalizingly close. These missed opportunities would later lead to intense scrutiny of law enforcement practices and parole supervision. In November 2006, a neighbor of the Garridos called 911 to report that there were tents in the backyard with children living in them. She described Phillip Garrido as a psychotic sex addict who was weird. A police officer responded to the call but never entered the house or inspected the backyard. Instead, he spoke with Garrido in the front yard and left without further investigation. In 2008, a parole officer visited the Garrido home. Despite Phillip being a registered sex offender, the officer did not conduct a thorough search of the property. Had they done so, they might have discovered Jaycee and her daughters living in the backyard compound. These incidents highlight the systemic failures that allowed Jaycee's captivity to continue for so long. They also underscore the importance of taking all reports seriously and conducting thorough investigations, especially when dealing with known sex offenders. The road to discovery. The events leading to Jaycee's eventual discovery began innocuously enough. On August 24, 2009, Phillip Garrido visited the University of California, Berkeley campus with 2 young girls, attempting to distribute religious literature and gain permission for an event he called God's Desire. His erratic behavior and the girls' submissive demeanor raised suspicions among the campus police officers. Upon running a background check, the officers discovered Garrido's status as a registered sex offender and his prior conviction for kidnapping and rape. This information prompted them to contact Garrido's parole officer, who was unaware that Garrido had young children. The next day, Garrido was summoned to meet with his parole officer. He arrived with his wife Nancy, the two girls, and a young woman who introduced herself as Alyssa, Jaycee. The parole officer, sensing something amiss, separated Alyssa from the Garridos for questioning. Initially, Jaycee stuck to the story she had been forced to rehearse for years, claiming to be a relative of the Garridos. However, as the questioning continued, her resolve began to crumble. In a separate room, Phillip Garrido, perhaps sensing the end was near, confessed to kidnapping Jaycee. When confronted with Garrido's confession, Jaycee finally revealed her true identity. After 18 years of captivity, Jaycee Lee Dugard was finally free. The aftermath. The discovery of Jaycee Lee Dugard made international headlines. The woman who had disappeared as a child was now 29 years old, a mother of two, and facing a world that had changed dramatically in her absence. Phillip and Nancy Garrido were arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, rape, and false imprisonment. In 2011, they both pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have required Jaycee to testify. Phillip was sentenced to 431 years to life in prison, while Nancy received 36 years to life. For Jaycee and her family, the road to recovery was just beginning. Reunited with her mother, Terry Probin, Jaycee faced the monumental task of rebuilding her life and creating a new normal for herself and her daughters. The case led to intense scrutiny of California's parole system and law enforcement procedures. How could a registered sex offender keep a kidnapping victim hidden for 18 years while under supervised parole? These questions led to changes in policies and procedures, as well as a $20 million settlement from the state of California to Jaycee and her children as compensation for the failings of the parole system. Jaycee's journey to healing. In the years following her rescue, Jaycee Lee Dugard has shown remarkable resilience and strength. She has become an advocate for victims of sexual abuse and kidnapping, using her experiences to help others and raise awareness about these issues. In 2011, Jaycee published her first book, A Stolen Life, a memoir. In this deeply personal account, she detailed her years in captivity and her ongoing journey of healing. The book became a bestseller, with Jaycee's raw honesty and courage touching readers around the world. 5 years later, in 2016, Jaycee released a second book, Freedom, My Book of Firsts. This work focused on her experiences after captivity, chronicling her rediscovery of the world and her efforts to reclaim her life. From simple pleasures like going to the movies or eating in a restaurant to more profound experiences like watching her daughters grow up in freedom, Jaycee's account is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal. Jaycee has also established the Jaycee Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families recovering from abduction and other traumatic experiences. Through this work, she has transformed her own suffering into a force for good, helping others navigate the difficult journey of healing and recovery. The impact on society. The Jaycee Dugard case had far-reaching implications beyond the individuals directly involved. It sparked important conversations about child safety, the effectiveness of sex offender registries, and the supervision of paroled offenders. In California, the case led to an audit of the state's sex offender management program and changes in parole supervision practices. It also highlighted the importance of following up on seemingly minor reports, as evidenced by the missed opportunity in 2006 when a neighbor reported suspicious activity at the Garrido home. The case also underscored the complex psychological dynamics at play in long-term kidnapping cases. Jaycee's situation challenged simplistic notions of captivity and escape, revealing the powerful effects of prolonged trauma and manipulation. Moreover, Jaycee's story has become a source of hope and inspiration for many. Her resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity, her love for her daughters despite the circumstances of their birth, and her commitment to helping others have made her a symbol of the indomitable human spirit. Lessons learned and ongoing challenges. While Jaycee's rescue was cause for celebration, it also forced society to confront uncomfortable truths. How many other victims might be hidden in plain sight? How can we better protect vulnerable individuals from predators? How can we improve support for survivors of long-term trauma? These questions have led to increased funding for law enforcement training, improved coordination between agencies, and greater emphasis on thorough follow-up of all reports involving registered sex offenders. However, challenges remain, particularly in balancing public safety with the rights of individuals who have served their sentences. For Jaycee and her family, the journey continues. While they have made remarkable progress, the scars of those 18 years will always be part of their story. Jaycee's daughters, now young adults themselves, face their own unique challenges as they navigate a world they were hidden from for so long. Conclusion. The story of Jaycee Lee Dugard is one of unimaginable horror and suffering, but it is also a story of survival, resilience, and hope. From the 11-year-old girl snatched on her way to school to the strong, compassionate woman she is today, Jaycee's journey serves as a powerful reminder of the human capacity to endure and overcome. Her story has changed laws, influenced public policy, and touched countless lives. It stands as a stark warning about the evil that can lurk behind a facade of normalcy, but also as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the healing power of love and compassion. As Jaycee herself has said, "I don't want to be remembered for what happened to me." Instead, she wants her legacy to be one of hope and healing. Through her books, her foundation, and her advocacy work, she continues to transform her painful past into a force for positive change, proving that even after the darkest night, dawn will come. The tale of Jaycee Lee Dugard reminds us all of the preciousness of freedom, the importance of vigilance, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It challenges us to create a world where such stories become increasingly rare, where children are protected, and where survivors are supported in their journey to reclaim their lives. In the end, Jaycee's story is not just about the 18 years lost, but about all the years since, years of healing, growth, and an unwavering commitment to turning tragedy into triumph. It is a story that continues to unfold, touching lives and inspiring hope with each passing day.